Hello, and welcome to this session on Industrial Alternative Foods for Global Catastrophic Risk with Juan García Martínez. I'm Sienna, and I'll be the MC for the session. We'll be starting with a 15-minute talk by Juan, followed by a live Q&A session where Juan will respond to some of your questions. You can submit questions using the box to the right-hand side of this video. You can also vote for your favorite questions to push them up higher on the list. Now I would like to introduce our speaker for the session. Juan García Martínez has a background in chemical and process engineering and works as a research associate at the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters, also known as ALFED. He studies single-cell proteins as an alternative food source in the event of a sun-blocking global food catastrophe, such as a large asteroid, supervolcano, or nuclear winter. Here's Juan.
Hello and welcome to this presentation on industrial solutions to mass starvation for global catastrophic risks. At ALFED, our mission is to enable humanity to recover from abrupt food production shocks, thus reducing the severity of global catastrophic risk and the probability of existential risk. Some members of our board of advisors include Anders Sandberg and Robin Hanson from the Future of Humanity Institute, Martin Hellman from Stanford University, who is the recipient of a Turing Award, and Jan Talling, known for having founded Skype. Two key members of our team are David Denkenberger, our director and co-founder, and Joshua Pierce. Together, the two of them started the Alternative Foods Research Line in 2014. In this diagram, I'm showing most of the global catastrophes that we deal with at ALFED, with increasing gravity in the x-axis from left to right. First, we look at events classified as global disasters that could produce food production loss on the order of around 10%, so losing around 10% of the calorie production capacity of humanity. This could be produced by any of the events on this list, and the expected probability of this happening, or a combination of these happening in the next 100 years, is over 80%. We also study scenarios that include loss of industrial civilization, in which we lose all of the industry or power production facilities. But the most important ones, or the ones we focus on the most, are global catastrophes that include total food or near total food production loss, on the order around 100%. We expect the probability of one of this scenario occurring during the next 100 years is on the order of magnitude of 10% chance. These global catastrophes are mostly described by the subset of sun-blocking global catastrophes. This could be produced by an event such as the impact of a large asteroid or comet, a supervolcanic eruption, or a global nuclear war causing nuclear winter. In these sun-blocking catastrophes, a great amount of smoke will be produced and lodged into the atmosphere, preventing most of the solar radiation from entering Earth, thus making global agriculture infeasible in most of the planet. So we're going to be discussing this type of events and solutions to them in depth in the rest of the presentation. Let's characterize our proposed sun-blocking in global catastrophic risk scenario. The change will be abrupt. Abruptness is a key property of these scenarios, which makes adaptation to them very difficult, to the contrary of scenarios such as climate change. Global food storage would last 3 to 6 months expected, but increasing the reserves of this food storage would be expensive, slow, and cause scarcity, which could harm poor countries now. So instead of this, we're proposing the production of alternative foods that could be produced even during the sun-blocking catastrophe, which we think could save lives much more cost effectively than increasing food reserves. In our proposed sun-blocking scenario, we would have critically reduced solar radiation, and we are assuming that the global population, biomass, and infrastructure are not irreparably affected. We will have a temperature drop on average of 8 degrees Celsius in 1 year, which could mean a drop of up to 40 degrees in some regions on Earth. In fact, we expect from models that most of the more northern hemisphere will have below freezing temperatures even in summer. And the energy, water, and dwelling needs of the population are assumed to be covered in this scenario. So we expect that if we were to rely on food storage only, the price of food would rise up to $100 per dry kilogram, and we could save at most 10% of the global population. However, if we were able to produce and in mass alternative foods that were cheap, we think we will be able to push survivability of the population over 90%. In fact, if we were able to produce, for example, seaweed at a price of $2.5 per dry kilogram, we expect that around 97% of the global population will be able to afford it and thus avoid starvation. In this table, I'm showing the current prices of some of the emergency foods we are proposing. In bold, we can see some of the key low-tech solutions we are looking at. For example, sugar beets and potatoes cultivated outdoors, if that were feasible, depending on the severity of the catastrophe, or cultivating grains in greenhouses in the tropics, low-tech greenhouses in the tropics. We also could produce possibly seaweed in the ocean in great amounts, and it will be a cheap solution. Or we could extract protein concentrate from leaves, or obtain milk from the remaining ruminant population. These low-tech solutions are key for fulfilling the caloric requirements of humanity after the catastrophe, but we would be probably missing in some key macronutrients such as proteins and fats if we were to rely only on them. So for that we have industrial solutions, even though they scale slower than these low-tech solutions. For these industrial solutions, we will be able to leverage some existing resources to produce food even without the sun. For example, we could use the lignocellulosic biomass, such as leaves, trees, or agricultural residues that will be lying around, or we could use fossil fuels such as coal, gas, and oil, or even CO2, whether from industrial sources or extracted directly from the atmosphere. We could use it as a chemical construction block for food production. The first industrial solution I'll be presenting is single-cell protein, or SCP, which are these protein-rich granules that I'm showing here with a high quality of protein that are obtained by a special fermentation process by feeding special gases to particular microbes. These microbes require an energy source, a carbon source, a nitrogen source, and an oxygen source. If we feed these four things to them, they will grow, and we'll be able to separate them from the mixture, dry them, and use them to feed them to humans or to animals that could be fed to humans. But we propose to feed them to humans for efficiency, of course. This product could be obtained from different sources. We're going to be looking specifically at two. First, we're going to be looking at single-cell protein from natural gas or from methane. Specific microbes can digest methane as an energy and carbon source, and if we were to feed them also oxygen and an hydrogen source, for example, in the source of ammonia, they would grow, and we would be able to separate them from the reactor mixture, from the fermenter, through several dewatering steps, and then disrupt and break the cells down and dry the resulting product into these granules, which can be post-processed into a more palatable product. We expect the cost of this would be around $1.2 to $1.9 trillion in terms of capital cost to cover the global protein requirements of the entire population. This is still less money than has been spent by world governments around the world into stimulus checks for the global pandemic. So this speaks to the feasibility of the solution. So how fast could we produce this alternative food? This is characterized by the magnitude of ramp-up speed, which reflects the speed at which we can ramp up the production capacity of the food over time after the catastrophe. Here I'm showing the graph of the ramp-up speed in terms of the caloric requirements fulfilled of the population. And we've estimated that it would take nearly 2 years to start producing, to finish building the first construction plants. So since this is too slow, we looked at what would happen if we were to instead use fast construction methods, of which we've identified 24/7 construction as the most efficient ones. This means constructing around the clock, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And this would reduce original construction time to around 1/3 of the original value. So we would be able to start producing food not shortly after 1.5 years after the catastrophe event. Here I'm showing the same graph, but this time in terms of the protein requirements being fulfilled over time. And we can observe that using methane or natural gas single-cell protein, we would be able to fulfill global protein requirements in 2 to 4 years, so even within the duration of the catastrophe, which is key. Thus avoiding protein deficiency for most of the global population, if we could do it. So at what cost would this come? We've performed a net present value analysis, as we do for all the industrial alternative food solutions, which has yielded a result of a retail cost of the protein from $4 to $6 per kilogram dry. This will mean that that's the cost that people would buy it at retail stores. So that should be available or affordable for most of the global population. The other type of single-cell protein we've studied is single-cell protein from hydrogen and CO2. So these special microbes would use hydrogen as an energy source and CO2 as a carbon source. It doesn't matter where the hydrogen comes from, but we've looked at two representative processes, water electrolysis and coal gasification. In any case, we've estimated that the cost of the single-cell protein from hydrogen would be higher than that of methane at $6 to $16 per kilogram dry, but it could be lower depending on the situation. And it will also ramp up slower due to higher capital cost. It would take about 6 years to fulfill protein requirements on average using this technology. So even though it's overall worse than the methane single-cell protein, it could be better depending on the industrial situation or in different regions. The next solution is synthetic fat from petroleum. And this is based on taking a specific fraction of crude oil, known as petroleum wax, and subjecting it to oxidation and to several petrochemistry process steps in order to obtain synthetic fatty acids from the wax. Then we would take these fatty acids and react them with glycerol in order to obtain, through esterification, to obtain triglycerides that could be converted into a margarine-like product, allowing us to obtain the macronutrient of fat. This is a relatively fast scaling technology, and we expect that we will be able to, with it, to fulfill the global requirements of the population of fat in between around 1 to 3 years' time. However, we've identified a potential key resource bottleneck, which is the amount of actual petroleum wax available in the world. So depending on process efficiency, we expect to have a limitation between 50 to 100% of the fat requirements. So it's possible that we could only fulfill 50% of the requirements if there wasn't enough wax to go. And the last industrial food solution I'm showing here is lignocellulosic sugar. Here we would be taking lignocellulosic biomass, such as, for example, tree leaves, and subjecting it to biological and enzymatic treatment and chemical treatment in order to break down the cellulose contained in the biomass into simple sugars that can be digested by humans. The ramp-up speed of this technology is relatively slower compared to the other ones we've seen so far, but here we've looked at repurposing. Repurposing existing facilities, changing them to produce whatever they're producing right now to producing cellulosic sugar, is particularly promising. For example, we've estimated that if we were to repurpose pulp and paper production facilities, which would be relatively low cost repurposing, we would be able to produce up to 10% of the global caloric requirements even within the first year, which is a lot. And also the cost of the sugar would be reduced from $4 per kilogram dye using construction of new facility to $2.4 per kilogram dry with the repurposing. Finally, I'm showing in this graph the price to feed a person in dollars per person per day for all the industrial food solutions we've presented so far. And we see here that the price to feed a person goes from $1 to $6 on average for them, which should be affordable for most of the global population. This is for prices during the catastrophe. They will be cheaper outside of a catastrophe to produce. In the future, we'll be looking at other foods produced from CO2 and water under a grant from NASA, such as from electroactive bacteria or by non-biological conversion of CO2 into sugars or glycerol. We see that using these industrial solutions, we are able to obtain all three main macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So we can cover all of the main nutritional needs of the population. And we will look in future research at prioritization of the different foods and how to combine them for a feasible solution to a sunblocking catastrophe. Some conclusions I'd like you to take away are that industrial solutions are useful for low probability, large impact scenarios such as sunblocking catastrophes, of which we can expect a 1 in 10 chance in the next 100 years. And there are two key specifications for alternative foods: the speed at which it can ramp up and the price of the food. If they underperform in either of the two metrics, we wouldn't be able to use them effectively. And finally, industrial solutions produce all three macronutrients by leveraging waste products and fossil fuels. Finally, I'd like to make a call to action. If you're interested to learn more, please go to our website olfed.info and raise awareness about this issue, which is quite neglected in public discourse. If you're interested, you can also donate to global catastrophic risk organizations such as the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute or to Olfed directly. And if you are very interested, you're welcome to join us by sending an email to info@olfed.info or to look at our projects at effectivethesis.com. We're always looking for people from diverse backgrounds and with different sets of skills. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for that talk, Juan. I see we've got a number of questions submitted, so let's go with the first one. Are there any promising research being done on industrial solutions for ramping up micronutrient production?
Micronutrient production, yes. Well, although we're not looking specifically at assessing how we could take, how we could produce, for example, imagine those vitamin D pills that some of you may be taking. We're not looking specifically at how to ramping up the production of those, but we're looking at, we're doing research on how to combine the different alternative foods in our portfolio that we have so far in such a way that there wouldn't be any nutritional deficiencies there. So in a way, we're looking at how to scale up micronutrient production within the framework of scaling up calories in general. So in a way, we are, but not specifically on let's say, producing the compounds separately, but within the parts of that are contained in the foods that we're trying to produce already. And we think we can cover all of the nutritional needs of the population with the foods we have so far. For example, seaweed is very rich in iodine, and other nutrients would be a bit more difficult, like essential fatty acids. Would require maybe specific production processes for them, but we're looking into it in future research.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I think that kind of flows into this next question. Is protein deficiency that bad? Couldn't we just get enough calories in macronutrient supplements? And I suppose the focus isn't on just protein. It's also on those macronutrients such as iodine, as in the seaweed.
Right, so protein deficiency is quite bad, I'm hearing. As far as I know, it is a real issue in some parts of Africa that see famines periodically. You may have seen those pictures of people, usually children with bloated stomachs. Those kind of sicknesses usually stem from a diet very poor in protein and mostly based on carbohydrates. So usually if you have a protein deficiency, especially for children, it's a huge problem, but it can have devastating consequences in the metabolism for people of any age. That's why we're looking into single cell proteins, so from fermentation processes, as a very promising alternative food.
Okay, great, thank you for that. I'm gonna head off into the next question because we're running a bit out of time. Has Olfed identified any effective policy paths to reduce risk? For example, influencing government or multilateral organizations?
Oh, good question. I'm on the research side, specifically the technical research side. So it's not my expertise, and I cannot name any specific examples, but I'm aware that some of our members during the COVID-19 crisis were advising some African governments regarding how to respond. So we are in talks with some governments, also in countries, in developed countries. And we're looking into, I know there are people in the team looking into this. Sahil Shah is looking into this. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I'm actually going to ask one of my own questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I'm super interested so in the past, edible jelly has been made out of leather belts in past famines. Do you think Orfed is hanging on to a similar hope that people will eat whatever, strange things in the case of a catastrophic event?
Yeah, we usually get questions about the way that our solutions are strange, like eating bacteria and eating fats from petroleum and protein from leaves. And they are weird, yeah, but of course, it all depends on the gravity of the catastrophe. When you have a sun-blocking catastrophe like the ones we've discussed, it is presumable that most of the people in the world, specifically poor people, aren't going to be able to afford any of the stored food. So they're going to depend on whatever they're going to be able to get that is produced without relying on agriculture. So they're going to have to, if the catastrophe is very severe, they're going to have to eat whatever's available. So, even during famines, even if they weren't as severe as I'm looking at scenario, we've seen people eat some really, we would consider unreasonable stuff. So I think the answer to that is yes, especially for very severe catastrophes.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think when it's super severe, people will eat anything in survival mode. Awesome, thank you for that. And then last question. So someone's trying to imagine what a dollar means in a world that has had its sun loss. Could you say a bit more about how you estimate the costs of each solution? Are those costs of preparation or the cost of implementation after the event?
Right, so the costs of producing food after the event is we estimate it based on current costs. So as you would do with when you're looking at the feasibility of any chemical or food, we're looking at labor costs, production costs, such as any of the resources that are put in. There's also the capital cost. So when we look at it in a catastrophe, some of those costs would change quite a lot. The capital costs would be increased. For example, we usually increase them to account for producing the factories faster than normal. And then the prices of the different commodities required could fluctuate quite a lot. They could change significantly compared to the current values. Maybe electricity, the price could drop or the price could rise incredibly. So there's quite a bit of uncertainty there. And we're collaborating, for example, with researchers funded by Open Philanthropy to look at market equilibrium models to try to estimate how the economic system would look after a catastrophe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that is really important to consider. Thank you so much. That is all the time we have. As Juan mentioned in the talk, if you're interested in getting in touch with Orfed, you can email them and see how that goes. Thanks everyone for watching. See you later.